Welcome to UNCAGED. Today we're speaking with Tom Cross. Now, Tom is the founder of Aware Mind. Aware Mind is a high-performance consultancy dedicated to optimizing mindsets to support people living purposely, increasing their confidence, and activating their full potential. We've been living in a world where executive coaching has moved from being something that was perhaps a nice to have to really, I'd say, almost like a need to have for a lot of executives. So we'll be going through the world that Tom plays in. He focuses on developing leaders, creating and supporting high-performing teams, the development of resilience and performing under pressure, which are all things that we all need. I need, everyone needs, Tom. So I'm excited to go through all of those things. But before we get there, Tom, tell us a little bit about you and your career.
Well, thanks, Ben, first of all, for inviting me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here and speaking to you today. So I've worked in three main areas of my life. One is elite sport. So I've worked in Olympic Games. I've worked in professional rugby, football and cricket in the UK. I've worked with gold medal winners in Olympic Games and World Cup winners. So that's the elite sport angle. I've worked in projects for the Foreign Office, so working for people who work in sustained pressurized environments around the world, and that's mainly around developing resilience on an individual and team basis. And then thirdly, I've worked in business. So I've worked anywhere from Microsoft in America to Heineken in Asia. In the past 5 years or so, I'm working mostly in private equity and venture capital backed businesses. So that's kind of the path of the experience I've had.
Tom, tell me a little bit how you've kind of parlayed all this type of work into what you've built at Aware Mind.
So I think kind of one of the USPs is that I have worked in those three different industries. I think it's using that knowledge from working in high performance in those industries that allows me and my team to give a different angle to high performance to business people nowadays. So we work very much with individuals and teams to support them getting to where they need to get to. I find a lot of executives have awareness, they have self-awareness, but they tend to need some help supporting around self-regulation or coping strategies. So it's around supporting people. For me, once you have self-awareness and self-regulation, those two steps, that then leads people in a sense they feel control over themselves because they've got the self-awareness.
Let's break those down for a second, just so I completely understand. What do we mean by awareness? And let's start there and then go on to the self-regulation.
Okay. So self-awareness is just understanding what your strengths are, and what areas of development you need. I think a lot of time, the world is so busy and people, executives especially, move around so quickly and there's so many things to do. They stop having awareness of how they're feeling and how they're thinking and how they're actually coming across and what impact they're having. So self-awareness is about looking in the mirror and understanding what you're good at and what you need help at. I think, unfortunately, our brain is negatively biased. So we look out for threat. Physiologically, our brain looks out for threat. It's a survival mechanism. We have this little thing in our head called the amygdala, and it scans the environment looking for threat. Now, nowadays, in a lot of the Western world, touch wood, we don't have physical threat, but what we do have is emotional threat. Our brains haven't evolved, and so therefore we look out for and we scan for emotional threat. So, anything that threatens our sense of self, our identity, our self-confidence, gets heightened negatively in our brain. So I'm a big positive psychologist. So I'm really keen to support people becoming more self-aware of their strengths.
Right.
So Ben, for instance, if I asked you what are your top three strengths as a human being, what are your top three strengths in your role, I'd love it if you knew them straight away. And maybe you do. I'm not going to put you on the spot. You're putting me on the spot. So, but I'm a big
we'll have to set up a separate session, Tom. If you dare, you can dip into the mind of me and see where we end up in that discussion. But then you move on to the self-regulation. So tell me about what's self-regulation.
So another word for self-regulation is coping strategies.
Okay.
So it's about supporting individuals and teams, putting in place, once they've got that awareness of either a strength or an area of development, then do you have coping strategies to maximize your strengths? So I'm a
Hmm.
big believer in how can we make our strengths stronger, as well as areas of development. What do you need to put in place in order to manage those development areas? So, for
Mm.
instance, an example. Okay, under pressure, you might have dysfunctional thinking. So, what awareness do you have of what type of dysfunctional thinking do you have under pressure? Is it
Hmm.
catastrophizing? Is it black or white thinking? Is it mind reading? Is it negative predictions? You might have one of those types of thinking. Once you've got that
Hmm.
awareness, you can then move to step two, which is the self-regulation or coping strategies. And then we can help you think about maybe some, if you're negatively predicting, we can simply help you think about evidence-based questions about mining for the positive. So what
Yeah.
else could be there? What's the evidence for that? What can we?
Hmm.
How can we see something which is different?
Right.
And it's those two things linked together that allows people to feel a sense of control over themselves. When
Right.
people feel control over themselves, they feel more confident, and confident people tend to perform more
Better.
effectively.
Oh, well, there you go. It's that easy, everyone. That's all you have to do, and everything will be great. Obviously, getting there and the details and working through that path is where the magic happens. And Tom, certainly a lot of companies, enterprises have embraced coaching over the last, I'd say, 5, 10 years. I mentioned to you before the show, it's a generational shift. I mean, I think that when I was coming up in the workforce, if you had a coach, it was perceived as a bad thing, like almost kind of probation. You're placed on it with a coach. And now if you don't have a coach, you're kind of a loser, right? So it's a real flip. It's amazing. And there's been a ton of technologies that have been rolled out in the space. And tell me a little bit about where we are now in that kind of, I'd say, high performance consulting and executive coaching.
Yeah, I still think we're. I agree with you. I think it's becoming much more commonplace. I have a love-hate relationship with the coaching technology that's out there. I think
Yeah.
it's. I'm a big believer in human-to-human technology, human-to-human coaching.
Yeah.
And if I can, I always try and see clients face to face at least once or twice in the early days of our coaching relationship in order to gain that familiarization and gain that connection and bonding. But
I'll say something. I'll just interject really quick. It was fascinating that during COVID, we had a ton of pressure in my companies to bring on technologies, to utilize technologies for our employees that would help them with
mm,
things like
mm,
coaching, et cetera.
mm,
And we did. We made the investments. And it was funny because there was so much pressure to invest in these things
mm.
and no one used them. Like
Interesting.
0% of people actually use them. However, if
Mm,
we hired a coach for someone, amazingly successful. So it was
mm,
kind of fascinating to me to see that there was kind of like a desire, I think, to turn it into a scalable technology that could just be rolled out
mm.
everywhere and someone
Yeah,
can make $1 billion off of that. But it didn't kind of grab what you were just hitting on. And I'll let you keep going, that kind of human
yeah,
side and the human
yeah.
quality.
And don't get me wrong, I do think for some companies, I think it can absolutely support maybe mass uptake of coaching, but dependent on people as your experience about there. But I mean, I work a lot in private equity these days, and I still think there's it depends on which private equity firm you work with, what their uptake is with coaching, whether they think it is a useful and viable value creation path for their company. I
Mm-hmm.
think that with what's happening financially at the moment and with value creation getting harder and harder, I do think private equity is looking further and more deeply into exec coaching, into team effectiveness work, and into kind of the human connectedness and what coaching can how coaching can support somebody
Mm-hmm.
moving forward and creating value within their portfolio businesses,
Yeah.
because the financial state of the world is just difficult at the moment.
So I always ask, especially for someone like yourself, what is it that got you to enter this space professionally? You clearly were involved in aspects of high performance for a while, but there's something that must have kind of said, this is something that business people need.
Well, I mean, I suppose my own genesis is that I played sport to a decent level when I was younger. So I played hockey. I had an England trial at hockey at schoolboy level, field hockey, that is.
Yes, yes.
And I played county cricket. So playing in elite sport and elite environments was kind of my childhood. And then I studied psychology at university. So it's about putting them together, got me into the high performance stage in the first place. But then it was really, I was working in elite sport. I was working at the English Institute of Sport, which is the main scientific support body behind Olympic and Paralympic sports in the UK. And a colleague of mine was working for an organizational psychology company and said, we really like what you do in sport. Do you want to come and help us do some of that in business? So that was back in kind of 2010. And then since then, I've slowly either worked with organizations as an associate, but since 2014, I've been on my own with Aware Mind. And as I say, working within business, sport, and the Foreign Office. So it's something that people say to me, what's the difference between working in those three industries? And for me, you're working with human beings. You're working with human beings who want to be better in whatever they do. Yes, the context is different, but I do think there's quite a lot of transferable learnings and impacts that you can create to working in those three different areas.
And I feel, Tom, that we're at a moment where we had perhaps a lack of just any knowledge in a space like this, how to really improve performance, to now we have just a ton of information that pours in. Tell me a little bit about what kind of data you need to do what you do and how you and your team analyze that information.
Typically, when we work with an executive, we do psychometric testing beforehand. So I use a couple of psychometric tests. I like to use a 360-degree profile. So I do that one of two ways. There's an online quantitative questionnaire that we use, or there's a more verbal qualitative method where I ask my client to give me 6 people that they work in depth with, and I ring those 6 people up and speak to them for 30 to 45 minutes to gain information about that individual. We then triangulate that between the psychometrics. So I use Luminous Spark from a personality point of view. I use Hogan MVPI for motivation values, and the Hogan HGS from a kind of derailer, dark side under pressure, what might happen to you. And it's kind of using that personality, the motivation bit and the derailer bit, along with the 360, gives me some data to then use in the first. I typically bring that into my kind of second or third session with an executive. And it's all about, as I say, going back to increasing self-awareness. So helping that executive increase their self-awareness about their strengths, about areas of development, about maybe what their intention of how they want to be is different from the perception of other people. And how can we close that intention and perception gap to support people becoming more congruent and more authentic and aligned to how they want to be and how they come across?
In sports, you have very clear goals, right? It's usually to perhaps on an individual level achieve certain things like certain batting averages or, maybe setting new records in various areas. On a team basis, it's certainly winning, right? Winning leagues, winning championships, winning tournaments. How do you work with executives on that area? Because I feel like there's a need almost like for coaching on a continuous basis for sure. But I'm trying to kind of bring that together with that idea of in sport, it's like I get mentally tough and then I become the next Djokovic, right? Right. And I win Wimbledon. Yeah. But, in the context of business, is that something that executives will highlight? Like, I really want us to achieve a certain revenue goal, or I want to get this job, or I don't know.
Absolutely. And it's different for different people, right, Bant? So, there could be someone about transitioning jobs. Absolutely. And that is the clear quantitative goal that we're supporting them with. Working in private equity and venture capital, there's an exit. There's an exit strategy. They want to get to a certain level in order to sell the company in 3 to 5 years' time. So it's definitely, working the Olympic Games, if you talk about transferability between sport and business, Olympic Games is obviously a 4-year cycle. Private equity typically is 3 to 5 year cycle, although it's getting a little bit longer now. There's definitely that similar amount of working with a team, working with that company in order to generate that value within that 3 to 5 years time frame in order to get to a value that the private equity firm is happy to then sell the company on an exit. exit that company. So there's some
Mm.
transferability, and then so working with CEOs of private or portfolio businesses in private equity, there is that similarity. But then when you're working with an individual in a different industry, in a normal corporate business, we do very clear goal setting with them. So what is your outcome goal? What is your performance goal? And what is your process goal? So
Mm.
it's a very clear, and that's a transferable method that we bring from sport into business. And it's very similar to the kind of the OKRs, which have been around at the moment, which have been around the past few years. But what we help our clients. What is your vision? So what's your future aspirational vision in 3 to 5 years' time? Where do you want to get to? What do you want to be? Okay.
Okay.
In order to get to that, what's your outcome for this year? What's the outcome of what you want to achieve this year?
Right.
Okay. In order to get that, what's your performance goal? And performance goals have to be measurable. It's almost like a stick in the sand. We're at 4, we need to get to 6. It's an observable, measurable, statistical goal. And then underneath that's the process goal. So in order to hit that performance, what are the processes that you need to do in order to hit that performance goal? And then it's kind of like if you ever played dominoes with your grandparents, you stack them up one by one, and you hit one, and one hits the other, one hits the other, and they all kind of fall down.
Yeah.
That's the phrase that comes from sport. Focus on the process, the outcome will take care of itself. So you hit the process, the process will hit the performance will hit the outcome. And so we help people to generate that method of understanding their story and understanding their future of how to get there. And you need all 4 levels, because the vision and the outcome is the motivational bit. That's the exciting bit. That'll get you out of bed in the morning. But the process bit is the bit which is in your control.
Yeah.
The process is most in your control. Outcome is motivational. You need both. You need all of them in order to lead ourselves and helping support people in order to get to where they want to get to moving forward.
So, Tom, I think that there's something really interesting about the kind of the broader performance coaching space, and love to get your take on this, because I think we all want our companies and our lives to go from the bottom quadrant up to the upper right-hand corner. That's the goal, right? Everyone wants to get there.
That's ideal.
And yet life doesn't seem to fully really work that way, right? I mean, life's a bit of a roller coaster. There's things that can kind of whack you various ways. Tell me a little bit about how that would work. How do you deal with executives that have challenges or setbacks along that way? So like, let's say they're going and then they dip. I don't know, maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe maybe the aware my customers are perfect. But tell me a little bit more about how you deal with the roller coaster and keeping them on track.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a really great question. I think it's a fallacy that life is very linear. From A to Z is like a straight line. There's a really interesting journal. I won't go into the journal, but the title is "The Rocky Road to the Top." And I'm a big believer that failures. I mean, Amy Edmondson writes about this, and other people, and failures really make people. It really gives people a chance to learn and reflect on what happened and why that happened. I'm a big believer in people pushing their comfort zone in order to be where they can get to. If people have, life is full of ups and downs. That's normal. So there's reality to it, I think, is the first thing. Acceptance to it is the second thing. Let's not fight it. Let's work with it. John Kabat-Zinn, who's kind of the godfather of mindfulness, talks about, the waves will always come, but it's about learning to surf. The waves are the pressure. There's no point trying to stop the waves. We can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. That was his quote. And I love that quote, because it's about managing pressure. It's not about stopping pressure. You can't stop pressure. But what you can do is you can become more effective to manage pressure and understand what happens to your thoughts, feelings, and physiology under pressure, and then put in coping strategies in order to manage that. I'm not a clinical psychologist. My wife actually is a clinical psychologist, so I'm trained to understand when people need more support, and I'm very very happy to refer people on to that direction if they need to. But yeah, going back to your original question, it's around learning through failure. It's about accepting that's going to happen. And actually, I think it's helping people, support people to say that I think people are stronger. My mum, my dear mum always used to say to me, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So it's about what you learn from this. I'm a big believer in the learning cycle of aim, plan, do, review, aim, plan, do, review. I think a lot of people go aim, do, aim, do, aim, do, and they might plan a little bit, but they don't review.
I've had it in discussions with younger executives as they're coming up, and they, especially successful folks, they'll have had a good run and then they'll hit a wall or a real challenge. It's quite interesting sometimes to see them handle that, like how they handle that, right?
What do you observe?
It may be a generational thing right now, but I would say that probably my generation would have been, if you go through a very bad patch, the message was very clearly like, dig deeper, suck it up. Yes, it's horrible, but
pull your socks up.
Like, yeah, pull your socks up. Like, find your way through the muck, basically. And I think that message doesn't really land well with the Generation Y or Generation Z. And they, I think, are looking more for it to be kind of like a cathartic process to figure out a solution. And there's a kind of a higher focus on making sure that that's done in a balanced way. So there's, whereas I think we would have been more like, yes, yes, your boss is being horrible. It's okay. Fight through it, And I'm not saying, I think what I always feel about Gen Z and millennials in general, they're much better people. They're much much more balanced people. They're able to set boundaries much more clearly, and I think that that's probably ultimately good as a human being, right? So
no, I think it's a really interesting point you say there. And when you get into business, you obviously got different generations in businesses. So you've got different generations who have got, as you've just pointed out and explained, have got different expectations and understandings of how you manage these difficult scenarios. But I do think the younger generation is expecting more compassion and more empathy for people, to meet them where they are, to have a more connecting and facilitating conversation with them. But I think both ways, both the people coming up and the people who are already at the top, the older, we all need to flex and adapt to the human being that's in front of us. And for me, that is one of the best executives I see, are those who are able to adapt and flex while keeping the performance angle on what the culture and the company needs to go and where they need to get to. But it's about adapting and flexing and being able to treat people in the manner that's going to motivate them the best. It's in the manner that's going to allow them to learn more effectively, in the manner that's going to allow them to reach their potential. So at the end of the day, as a manager, if you can get your people to hit their potential more often than not, you're going to have an easier life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's look forward, Tom. I mean, here we are at the tail end of 2023. Are there things that are on the horizon for Aware Mind in general, for the business, but also for the industry in 2024? What do you see next year as being the key areas?
For the industry, I think one of the biggest step changes, I think, is team coaching. So I think kind of team coaching is where individual coaching was 20 years ago. So it's embryonic. It's coming through. The ICF, the International Coaching Federation, has just accredited the team coaching route to become accredited as a team coach. I think that companies will. I think the world is looking for a we rather than an I. And I think it's about understanding how we can work with people, we can work in teams, and how teams can adapt and work more effectively together in order to achieve what they need to achieve. So I think individual coaching will still be very, very strong, but I believe that team coaching is going to have a step forward in the next, not just 24, 25, 26, because it's going to be commercially more effective for a company. I think it's going to be more impactful. So we talk about transferability from the training into actually the company. I think when you're working with a diverse group of people, 8 to 10 people in an intact team, and you're working on the dynamics, you're not working on the content, but you're working on the dynamic of that team, that will last longer back in the company than it will if you work individually. So I foresee team coaching.
I love
the
that. I love
the we being stronger.
I tell you, I hope you are right. I mean, this is like one of those things where I listen to you and I say, wow, that if we can improve the way that we work in
Mm,
enterprises as well as we work
mm,
together as a society, we will have a future, right?
yeah.
We can build something. But it's always fascinating to me. You're absolutely right. I think that's a big change. I would love to see more focus on that area. And I guess we now know Aware Mind is the place to go to start that
There we
process.
go.
If
Yeah,
someone
yeah,
wanted to learn more
absolutely.
about what you and the team are up to, where's the best place to reach you?
Yeah, it's the website. So it's www.awaremind.co.uk is the best place to have a look at who we are, what we do. Um, and yeah, love to speak to anybody who's interested, just to have a conversation about how we can support them moving forward.
Well, there you have it. Tom, thank you so much for being on the Uncaged show today. We've been talking about a very interesting topic. It's really that high performance consulting work that's done to help coaches really reach their goals, to develop as leaders. And it's been a space that's gotten a lot of focus, I would say, over the last half decade. A lot of companies have moved forward, but I really, really value this conversation today because Tom's really highlighted the importance of making sure that we make a human, that we deal with people and shape it for them, but we're also pulling together just a ton of data, ton of information in informing that process through that data. And last but not least, Tom, I think the point you're raising around coaching moving from the I to the we in 2024 is just such a positive idea. And I look forward to seeing the results, and hopefully we can have you back again and talk more about how that's evolving. So thank you so much for being on the
I,
Uncaged show today, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you, Ben. No, I appreciate that. And just to reinforce that, I think it's very much from being human doings to human beings. I think that's a big focus moving forward. So thanks very much.
Excellent. Cheers.